The winter night did not whisper, it screamed. Wind tore through the pine forest like a living thing, howling its hunger, snapping branches, burying the world under a merciless white shroud. In the middle of that frozen wilderness, a woman lay curled against the door of a collapsing cabin, her breath shallow, her fingers blue and stiff. They had left her there. Not because they forgot her. Not because they had no choice. But because they decided she was no longer worth saving. Her name was Eliza Moore, and 3 days earlier, she had still believed in people. The cabin had once belonged to her late husband's family, a forgotten speck deep in the northern woods. When her husband died in a logging accident the previous spring, his relatives promised to help her through the winter. They brought her food once. They checked on her twice. And then, as the snow grew deeper and her strength weaker, they stopped coming. The last time she saw them, they stood in the doorway with uneasy eyes, telling her supplies were scarce, that the roads were impassable, that everyone had to fend for themselves. Eliza knew the truth the moment they turned away. They had decided the risk of saving her was greater than the guilt of abandoning her. By the 4th night alone, the firewood was gone. By the 5th, the food. By the 6th, hope itself felt like a cruel joke. Eliza wrapped herself in her husband's old coat and waited for the cold to finish what people had started. Miles away, another soul moved through the storm. Jonah Hale had lived alone for so long that silence felt louder than conversation. The forest knew him, the rhythm of his axe, the careful way he stepped, the way he spoke softly to trees before cutting them down. He was a lumberjack by trade, but solitude was his true occupation. Years earlier, a fire had taken his small home and the woman he loved. Since then, Jonah built a new cabin deeper in the woods, far from towns, far from memories that hurt too much to carry. That night, Jonah had not planned to go out. The storm was brutal even by winter's cruel standards. But something restless tugged at him, the same unease he used to feel before the fire, before disaster struck. Against his better judgment, he pulled on his coat, slung a lantern over his shoulder, and stepped into the white fury. He had gone no more than a mile when he saw it, an unnatural shape against the snow. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe a fallen log. Then the lantern light caught a pale face. Jonah froze. The woman did not move. Snow clung to her hair, her lashes, her lips cracked and bloodless. For a heartbeat, Jonah feared he was already too late. He dropped to his knees, brushed snow from her face, and pressed his fingers to her neck. A pulse, weak, but there. She's alive, he whispered, though no one was there to hear him. Jonah did not think. He acted. He wrapped her in his coat, lifted her frail body with arms hardened by years of labor, and carried her through the storm. Each step was a battle against wind and fear, against the quiet terror that he might lose her before reaching shelter. When Jonah finally reached his cabin, his hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from urgency. He laid her by the hearth, stoked the fire, and warmed water over the flames. He spoke to her constantly, his voice rough and unused, telling her she was safe, that she wasn't alone anymore, that she had to hold on. Hours passed before her eyes fluttered open. Eliza woke to warmth. Real warmth. The kind she had thought she'd never feel again. She blinked, confused, her body aching, her throat dry. Above her stood a man with tired eyes and a beard dusted with gray, watching her as though she were something fragile and precious. "Easy," Jonah said gently. "You're safe. I found you in the snow." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. They left me," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die." Jonah's jaw tightened, anger flashing across his quiet face. He had seen cruelty before, but something about the way she said it, so calm, so defeated, cut deeper than any blade. "You're not dying," he said firmly. "Not tonight. Not here." The days that followed were slow and careful. Eliza was too weak to stand at first, her body fighting the aftermath of cold and starvation. Jonah cooked simple meals, fed her by hand when she could not hold a spoon, changed the bandages on her frostbitten fingers. He spoke little, but his actions said everything words could not. At night, when Eliza slept by the fire, Jonah sat at the table and watched the flames. He did not understand why fate had placed her in his path. He only knew that for the first time in years, his cabin felt less empty. As Eliza regained strength, fragments of her story emerged. She spoke of her husband, of love and loss, of promises broken. Jonah listened without interruption. He never told her about the fire, about the woman he lost, but Eliza sensed the grief in his silences. "You know what it's like," she said softly one evening. "To be left alone." Jonah nodded once. "Too well." Winter tightened its grip on the forest, but inside the cabin, something else took root: trust. Eliza began helping where she could, sweeping, mending clothes, bringing life back into a space long abandoned by hope. Jonah showed her how to split kindling safely, how to read the weather in the trees, how to listen to the woods instead of fearing them. One night, a knock shattered the quiet. Jonah opened the door to find 3 men standing in the snow, the same relatives who had abandoned Eliza. Their faces were tense, their eyes darting past him into the warm cabin behind. We thought she might have," one of them began. Eliza stepped forward before Jonah could speak. She stood tall, though her legs trembled. "You thought I'd be dead," she said. "And you were willing to live with that." The men shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't think anyone would find you." Jonah's voice was low, steady, dangerous. "You don't get to decide who's worth saving." They left without another word, shame heavy in their footsteps. Eliza closed the door with shaking hands, then leaned against it, tears streaming freely. Jonah did not say anything. He simply stood beside her, a silent promise that she would never face that kind of abandonment again. Spring came slowly, melting snow and fear alike. Eliza grew strong enough to walk outside, to feel the sun on her face. One morning, she stood at the edge of the clearing and realized something startling. She did not want to leave. "I could go back," she told Jonah quietly. "Find a town. Start over." Jonah nodded, though something in his chest tightened painfully. "You should do what's best for you." Eliza looked at him then, really looked at the man who had saved her life without asking for anything in return. "What's best for me," she said, "is staying where I'm wanted." Jonah did not answer right away. Then he reached for her hand, rough and warm. "Then you're home." Years later, travelers spoke of a cabin deep in the northern woods where no one was ever turned away, where warmth waited even in the coldest storms. They said it was built by a lonely lumberjack and a woman who refused to die when the world abandoned her. And the forest, which had once nearly claimed her life, stood quietly around them, not as an enemy anymore, but as a witness to what compassion can build, even from the coldest beginnings. Because sometimes, survival is not just about being saved. It's about being chosen.